Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Welcome to Accelerated Health with Sara, Banta. I'm a busy wife, mom of 3, and an NANP certified supplement professional, but that's not all. I'm also the founder of the multi-award-winning Accelerated Health Products, a brand offering innovative natural solutions and supplements to optimize your health. And this podcast isn't just a source of information, it's a community. We're all here to learn and grow on our health journeys. And this is a springboard to learning, and the free group coaching on Telegram, which is not censored, is where we continue learning together. You can ask questions about what you learned today or what triggered those thoughts like, oh my God, what do I do now? I post tips and tools every day as well to deepen your health and to keep you motivated to move forward. And every time we keep moving forward, that dopamine hit goes and we're then motivated to move forward even more. So here's what you can expect. New episodes every Monday and Tuesday live with in-depth health discussions and expert guests. And on Thursdays, hot topics of the week, where we go into what's going on in the news. And then, of course, the free health group coaching on Telegram, which is a supportive space to ask your questions and connect. The information can be found on my website, sarabantahealth.com. Have you thought about detoxing? Well, I've created over 10 unique, easy detox cleanse programs to help you reset your body, but you feel great day one. That's the difference. There's no detox flu. Take my detox quiz. The link is on the website, sarabantahealth.com, and you can find the right one for you. And if you don't know which supplements to start with, don't want to do a full cleanse, email me or complete the health goals form on the website, and I will put together a personalized protocol for you. So just by taking a few steps forward with your health, you will change your life. I'm here to help you at every step of the way. Today, we are talking about a topic that you will have fights over at parties on, and that is cholesterol. And we have the best person to speak about it, Mike Fave. He's back. Make sure you go listen to our other podcast. He's traditionally educated in Western medicine. This is the best part. But then he flipped over to doing things more natural and finding out what truly is the root cause of most disease. And it's not what you think. Welcome, Mike. How are you today?
Hello, Sara. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
You are such a wealth of knowledge, and you speak so eloquently and in layman's terms so we can all understand. And that's why I love talking to you about these difficult conversations. And honestly, I feel like talking about cholesterol is like talking about politics or religion, right? I mean, there's been fights and fights and fights. My own father will fight. I mean, we do not talk about cholesterol unless I want to get in a fight with my father, as he's on a statin himself, but eats all the stuff that you and I tell him not to eat. So when we look at cholesterol, the whole goal, and that's what I want to come back to. The whole goal for those who are saying lower your cholesterol is to lower your mortality risk, right? You lower your heart disease risk. So let's look at the goal. Can you come in and debunk the myths connecting cholesterol with heart disease, and maybe start with what are the different cholesterols and how it all works?
Yeah, so this is a great question. This is a huge topic. It's a huge debate in the different dietary spheres now between low carb and keto and carnivore and animal-based versus plant-based, vegan, vegetarian. And one side, and I guess you could also group the traditional medical side with the plant-based side. So one side says that cholesterol is the cause of cardiovascular disease, and that we need to lower it as much as possible. We need to get our levels down, particularly our LDL levels. And then on the other side, they say LDL is not an issue. It's not a problem. It's not something we have to worry about. The problem is more that there's damage going on to the vasculature, and the cholesterol is just an innocent bystander. So we have these two different camps. talking about these issues, and then basically, depending on which side you fall on, trying to figure out what's the best strategy for long-term health and minimization of cardiovascular disease, and also mortality from cardiovascular disease events like heart attacks and strokes, etc. So we have these two different camps. Now, it's all centered around the lipid profile. That's what we have in the center, right? So that's our total cholesterol, our LDL levels, our HDL levels, and our triglycerides. Now, there's more values and there's more things to actually look at than just those specific components that we see in the lipid panel. However, when you go to your doctor, they're just looking at the lipid panel. Most times, 9 times out of 10, depending on the doctor you go to, they're just looking at your lipid panel. That is your total cholesterol, your LDL, HDL, triglycerides. Now, there's a lot more information that you can get out of that, and we can talk about that. But I think the central focus, or at least my perspective on this circumstance, is while LDL cholesterol and cholesterol in general is indeed involved in cardiovascular disease, I think it's highly questionable as to say it's the primary driver or the primary cause. So I think there's a multifactorial problem going on inside the vascular system, and that problem involves cholesterol, but involves multiple other components. So just looking at the lipid panel is looking at one angle of things, and just trying to adjust the lipid panel is looking at only one angle of things. And this is important to understand because I think a lot of times lipids, cholesterol, heart disease, it's taken out of context. So the general context, as we continue to talk about this, that I think is important to understand is that the vasculature, the vascular system, your arteries, your veins, they are basically highways. It is a way for your body to transport different nutrients and oxygen and fats and carbohydrates and amino acids and things along these lines to your tissues from your digestive tract and then back. So from your tissues back to your liver and then out through your digestive tract. So it's a transport system. So you want to understand, like, what are these lipid proteins actually doing? They're transporting fats, because fats aren't soluble in water and our blood is water-based, from our liver to our tissues and from our tissues back to our liver. And so when we have this overarching context, we start to say, oh, these are the highways between the different areas. Then we can start to understand more, like, why do these things matter? What's going on in these highways? What is there damage to the highways and the cholesterol is being deposited? And so I want to set this analogy, this frame here, and then we can jump in and talk about what that means going forward. But the highway analogy, I think, is helpful to start. And also to start, we have these two camps. And then the major thing that they're focusing on is just these these proteins that transport fats in the blood. That's your cholesterol, what we typically call your cholesterol, your total cholesterol, your HDL, and your LDL. And I want to leave it here, and then we can jump in further from there.
So it reminds me of, there's a little echo there. It reminds me of when my mom she had surgery, she was on some pain medication, her liver enzymes went through the roof. So the doctor put her on a steroid to lower liver enzymes instead of actually figuring out what was causing the liver enzymes to go up. And it's kind of like, blaming the firemen for the fire, but then to correct the fire, we're going to get rid of the firemen. Well, the fire is just going to keep burning even worse because you're not taking care of the actual root problem, right?
Yep.
So I love how you explain the role of HDL and LDL. And before we get in there, I just want to say that ever since my very first blood test in my early 20s, my cholesterol's been high. And as much as we can have this conversation, Mike, I see that it is still hard to see that big H in red that says, hi, you're out of range, right? It's like, oh, what did I do wrong? But it's not bad. My HDL's really good and it's high. And I have that response, or I get that response from a lot of my listeners as well, saying, Sara, I do everything you tell me and my cholesterol's high. And it kind of freaks people out because of these ranges on the blood test. So what are the importance of the HDL, LDL, VLDL, and what are their roles? How are they different? And when should we be worried?
Okay. So going back to this highway analogy, the LDL, these LDL, HDL, these proteins are carrying fats in the blood. They're basically Amazon trucks carrying packages, because these packages, the fats, aren't soluble in the water of our bloodstream. Our bloodstream is made mainly out of water. So all we are looking at when we are looking at the lipid panel is we are seeing the transport of fats with LDL from our liver to our tissues. And then HDL is from our tissues back to our liver. So they're just two different, basically, transport trucks, delivery trucks. And when we're looking at these in different states, the amounts of these components will shift based on the context of the body, based on what the body needs. So as an example, if you are low carb, your total cholesterol levels tend to rise and triglycerides tend to lower. We'll talk about that. And basically what's happening is your body's saying, hey, we need more fats delivered to the tissue because we are primarily burning fats. So this is a way for our bodies to transport more fats from our liver. So we see LDL go up, we see total cholesterol go up, and oftentimes you also see HDL go up as well because you have just more of these fats being transported around because we are not eating carbohydrates. If you are on a higher carb diet, what you'll immediately see, and I've had clients with their cholesterol values all the way up in the 700s, the 800s, the 500s on low carb diets come down from those numbers without drugs just by adding carbs into their diet to the low 200s. So a 4 times decrease in their total cholesterol values from 800 down to 200 just by switching the diet around and getting them back into range by playing with other components inside the diet. Because again, when we think about cholesterol, what we're thinking about is these are transport components, and the body's adjusting these transport components based on its particular needs. So when you're starting to use carbs, right, you're starting to oxidize mainly carbohydrate, you don't need to have as much transport of fats to the tissues from the liver and this circulation recycling of fats with the different HDL components and whatnot, because you actually have this utilization of carbohydrate going on instead. So when you use carbs, you don't need to transport as much fats. And when you're starting to use fats, you need to transport more fats. You're going to have more of this cholesterol inside your bloodstream. Now, when you have an infection, when you're sick, you also raise cholesterol because the cholesterol can actually bind toxic components, the bacterial metabolites like endotoxin, and then other elements, viral components inside the blood, and tag them to be brought to the liver to be detoxified. So the raising of cholesterol in the sickness state is a response by the immune system adaptively to help you manage that sickness oftentimes. So you'll see that rise in chronic inflammation states. You'll see that rise in sickness states after acute illness, as you were discussing with your mom or your dad, or I've seen this with multiple clients. They get sick, the cholesterol values go up, and then they eventually come down. So there's another state where you see the lipid values rise. The major one that people are focusing on and worried about is the cardiovascular risk profile. And this is where you get what's called atherogenic dyslipidemia. So basically you have a lipid profile that is strongly associated with cardiovascular disease. And this is driven by chronic low-grade inflammation, metabolic dysfunction, insulin resistance. And so what's actually happening, at least from my perspective, is we have metabolic dysfunction happening peripherally at the cells. We have it happening at the liver. And then when we look at a lipid panel, what we're saying is, oh, all of these values are all types of skewed in the wrong direction and all messed up because of what's going on from the liver, from the peripheral tissues, with the immune system function. So it's starting to give you this high LDL, this low HDL, those high triglycerides, high total cholesterol. And so basically all this lipid panel is showing you is, hey, you have metabolic dysfunction going on. You have some insulin resistance going on. And it's reflected in the lipid panel, but it doesn't mean the lipid panel is directly causing it. The problem is usually going on inside the cells and the tissues of the body, and you're just seeing what's happening in that transport system. So it's a signal, it's a symbol of what's going on, but it isn't the direct dysfunction itself. It's part of that dysfunction. So when I'm looking at a lipid panel, what I'm trying to say is, what is the state that this person's in? What is their overarching context? And then I'm looking at what's going on in the lipid panel. We'll talk about specific reading. And I'm saying, okay, based on this person's context, so you're low carb, you're intermittent fasting, you're on a high fat diet. It's like, yeah, LDL, total cholesterol, HDL, they're going to be bumped up. Triglycerides are going to be low. Is this atherogenic dyslipidemia? Not necessarily. This is likely related to low carb. And then we'll talk, there's different ratios and components to look at. But if I have somebody who's insulin resistant, their hemoglobin A1C is high, their fasting blood glucose is high, their insulin levels are jumping up, their CRP is high, and I see a really low HDL, high LDL, high triglycerides, high total cholesterol, and I see this context and saying, okay, this person is at risk for cardiovascular disease because they have metabolic dysfunction. It's reflected in their lipid profile, it's reflected in their metabolic markers, and reflected in their overall general health state that I can see because I'm looking at their symptoms. I'm actually looking at the person, not just reading a lab value and saying, oh, HDL or LDL is high, so you have cardiovascular risk. It's like, no, what is this full picture that we're looking at? So the lipid panel is a way to get a sense in context of what's going on with a person. By itself, it's not necessarily the best indicator, and there's way better values that you can look at altogether. And then again, we want to also understand that all we're seeing is what's happening on the highways. It's not telling us the state of the highways. So there's other markers that we want to look at for the state of the highways as well. And so we could dig into all of that. But that's the general picture when I'm looking at a lipid panel to try to understand what's going on and why this person has a lipid panel of X versus that person has a lipid panel of X. Instead of saying, oh, HDL or LDL or this, so your risk is Y. It's like, that's not really helpful. And then there's not really solutions there. And then the general solution is, yeah, just take drugs to lower it. And then people are, do I really have a problem? Is this a good idea? Are there downsides to those drugs? Which there are. And so it's, you're not getting a full risk reward profile if you're just stratifying the different lipid panels and values into different groups and saying, this is high risk, this is low risk. And then here's a drug if you're high risk, because you're not taking the context into perspective and you're not trying to determine what's the risk of using that drug for this particular lipid profile. And that's, I think, why there's so much uproar in the different spheres and why you have these like seemingly two massively different camps that are warring over lipids and cholesterol and the medications and these different components. And because it's like, it's black or white, and there's a lot of nuance to understand what's going on. And both sides can actually be rectified if you start to understand the full picture and put things into context.
That makes sense. So I want to dive a little deeper. You touched on it, but the lean mass hyperresponder,
yes,
right? So the triglycerides are low, but
yes,
the cholesterol is high.
Yes. So the lean mass hyperresponder, this was popularized by Nick Norwitz and Dave Feldman. Nick Norwitz, I think, is an MD PhD, and then Dave Feldman is an engineer, and they are both low-carb keto guys. And basically what they found, particularly Dave Feldman, who's the one who initiated this, found, hey, when I go low-carb, my LDL, my total cholesterol, all this jumps up. But my triglycerides get quite low, and then my HDL also stays high as well. And so basically in the lean mass hyperresponder, which the general idea is that your body is relying heavily on utilizing fatty acids. And so you start to upregulate this transport system of using the lipoproteins, LDL, HDL, VLDL, et cetera, to drive the fats to the tissues because you don't have a lot of carbohydrate coming in. Usually they're exercising, and usually they don't have a lot of body fat. So you have a lot of export of fats to the tissues because you're using all of this fat on a regular basis. And it reflects, again, in the lipid profile because you're just seeing, oh, we need to ship more packages of fat to the tissues. So let's get more Amazon trucks out there. Let's get more LDL out there to transport these fats because the utilization is quite high. And this state, even though it's high total cholesterol, high LDL, high VLDL is actually low, but you're seeing the high LDL, it's not necessarily an atherogenic dyslipidemia, which is where you see the risk of cardiovascular disease. Instead, what you're seeing is this person's on a low-carb diet. They're pretty lean. They have a relatively high activity level and possibly a decent amount of muscle mass. And so they need to have all this fatty acid export going on to power all this stuff that they have going on. And so as an example, in this state, like, hey, let me just give you a statin that blocks your production of cholesterol and lowers things altogether. It's like, maybe that's not the best idea in this state. Maybe this state is just a function of like their context and it's not actually pathology. And so I think that's the idea that they're presenting. And the uproar about this, like, why is this so important? Why does everybody care about this? Because you're seeing an alternative state that is showing high cholesterol, high LDL, and things along these lines. And if there's not a pathology associated with it, it completely starts to question the lipid hypothesis, which is the idea that just high cholesterol causes heart disease in and of itself. We need to smash cholesterol all the way down. So you have this on one side with this specifically, you have people like Nick Norwitz and Dave Feldman. And on the other side, you have people like Peter Attia who've been pushing this smash your cholesterol levels all the way down. the statins, the PCSK9 inhibitors, these different elements. Then you also even had a debate recently with Dr. Paul Saladino and Derek from More Plates, More Dates, where Paul is saying, like, look, I don't think it's a great idea to just pharmacologically lower your cholesterol. And Derek is saying, well, cholesterol associated with all these risks. So again, this is where you're seeing these camps break down of high cholesterol, low cholesterol, and without this discussion of context, whereas Dave Feldman and Nick Norwitz actually brought context into this. And I think that's like why there's such this debate around the lean mass hyperresponders.
So you just mentioned everyone's worried about the risks of high cholesterol, but let's talk about what we need cholesterol for. There's a risk of having too low of cholesterol, correct?
Yeah, so that's a great question and a great point. So cholesterol itself is involved, as I mentioned, in immune function. It's also involved in cellular integrity and structure. It's also involved in the production of steroid hormones, and it's involved in the production of bile acids. And so all of these things are extremely important for bodily functions. So you want to make sure that you want to actually have cholesterol present. And so when we look at some of the drugs that just blanketly lower cholesterol production, like statins, we actually see increased risks of diabetes and possibly increased risks of cancer related to some of these components. I can talk about specific mechanisms if you like. And then we also see myalgia, which is driven largely by mitochondrial dysfunction inside the muscle tissue, because you can't produce certain proteins if you don't have some of the metabolites in the cholesterol production pathway that the statins block. And the next thing that we start to see with the statins is that you start to see issues with cognitive function over time in certain individuals. So we have increased risk of certain problems with statins, and we actually have direct quality of life problems with cognitive dysfunction and also muscle pain and muscle issues, myalgias, with statin use because of their effects on the cholesterol pathways, where in those pathways, there's components that are needed for mitochondrial function, with the mitochondria being absolutely essential towards energy production, which for me is extremely important to focus on because I come from this perspective of energy metabolism, mitochondrial function being a central piece of health at large. So if you're blocking something that is leading to the production of certain proteins that optimize mitochondrial function, then what starts to happen is you start to see damage to the mitochondria, and you get these pretty significant symptoms like the myalgias, cognitive dysfunction, and an increased risk of diabetes and possibly cancer with statin uses over the long term. So these are things that came out of the clinical trials with statins later on, but like, oh, we're seeing this, this jump in diabetes risk. So those are things that we want to, you want to keep in mind when you're saying, am I going to hop on a statin? Am I not going to hop on a statin? And that's also why knowing your context is important in the first place, so that you can balance the pros versus cons of using something like that.
Hormonal imbalance is already crazy amongst people, men and women, estrogen dominance, all of this. So one more thing to screw up your hormones, right? I mean, that's only going to make things worse. You men are going to lose your testosterone and the problems in the bedroom, and women, that's not something anyone's really looking for right now. And it also is really interesting because most people, I would say, are suffering from suboptimal thyroid function. How is cholesterol related to hypothyroidism?
So those are all great points. And the one thing to note about statin usage in hormones, and then I'll jump into thyroid, the statins, what they are able to do is, when you don't have cholesterol, and cholesterol being the precursor to steroid hormones, is they do lower the steroid hormones. And there are studies that show a decrease in testosterone and free testosterone levels in men. The drop is not massive. However, most people who are going on statins oftentimes have metabolic dysfunction, often are pre-diabetic, diabetic, heart disease, and then usually low testosterone already comes with those components. So it's possible it may drop them even further. So that is something, particularly for men, something to consider. In terms of thyroid function, one of thyroid's primary jobs is to take cholesterol, drive it into the cell, and then drive it into the mitochondria to produce those steroid hormones. And so a lot of times individuals can have elevated cholesterol levels purely because their thyroid function is suboptimal, or they are blatantly hypothyroid. And so in that situation, the solution is not necessarily to take a statin. The solution would be to actually manage thyroid function, because once thyroid function starts to improve, the cells will be able to uptake the cholesterol much better overall. So again, this is speaking to the importance of understanding your individual context with your lipids, with your lipid profile, your cholesterol levels, et cetera, and then determining what you need to do. Are your lipids elevated because you're on low carb? Are your lipids elevated because you have atherogenic dyslipidemia? And I say that in quotations, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And then, or is it because you're hypothyroid or because you have an acute infection? And in each of these different states, there's a different treatment protocol or different solution to manage the lipid profile based on their context. It's not just like, oh, you're high, here's the statin. It's why is it high in the first place? And oftentimes that's not being assessed or addressed in most circumstances. Again, it's just looking at the lipid profile only, which does not tell you these different components. If you just get your comprehensive metabolic panel, CBC, a complete blood count, and a lipid panel at your yearly checkup, you will have a hard time delineating if one of these things is the causes of your elevated cholesterol levels. And then the doctor say, oh, you need to go on a statin. But it's like, do you? Is there thyroid dysfunction? Is there something going on with metabolic dysfunction? Is there something going on with a chronic infection? Are you on a low carb diet? And all of these circumstances will be managed, or should technically be managed, differently.
So we are told, or I mean, I'll never forget when I was a child, my dad would not eat the egg yolks because he thought it was going to raise his cholesterol. This is while he's taking the statin drug. So is there some truth to that? Is there some truth to eating cholesterol is going to raise your cholesterol? And if not, what foods will affect your cholesterol?
Yeah, so another great question. There is a small proportion of people who do respond to dietary cholesterol, termed hyper-responders. So when they eat dietary cholesterol, it will raise their levels. But for the vast majority of people, the liver is the main site of cholesterol production. So when you start to take in more cholesterol in the diet, the cholesterol will actually be adjusted in terms of production at the liver. So you won't actually, your liver will just not produce as much cholesterol. So I think even the major regulating bodies have adjusted and said dietary cholesterol does not necessarily lead to elevated cholesterol levels inside the blood. Now, what they haven't removed, if I remember correctly, they haven't removed the warning for saturated fats, which saturated fats comparatively to monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats do tend to actually raise cholesterol levels. However, many times they tend to raise total cholesterol levels, including LDL and HDL, depending on the saturated fat, right? Because there's different types of saturated fats. Now, something else to consider is that the polyunsaturated fats don't necessarily, they directly lower the cholesterol levels through a variety of mechanisms, some of which aren't ideal, and the saturated fats are raising. So when you're looking at this comparative shift, it's saturated fat will give you more cholesterol than polys, because polys are lowering and the saturated fat are raising through different mechanisms, whereas monounsaturated fat tends to be a bit more neutral overall. So the three different types of fats will have an effect. Dietary cholesterol in a specific subgroup of people, you'll see an effect, but it's not everybody's just going to have an egg yolk and see their cholesterol skyrocket. It's a very small subset of people will see that. So it's mainly around adjusting different fat intake, but even then it's still relatively negligible. I'm not seeing 100-point swings in cholesterol levels in my clients, but between, like, if they're having a bit more saturated versus monounsaturated fat, it's more whether they're low carb or high carb, or if they have metabolic dysfunction. Those are the biggest drivers, or the infections or hypothyroidism that's moving the lipid panel in individuals.
So I know you're not a fan of PUFAs, but right now I just heard you say that they lower cholesterol. Can you connect the dots there?
Yes. So, and this is the major argument for the consumption of polyunsaturated fatty acids, which is PUFAs, is that they lower cholesterol levels and therefore lower cardiovascular risk by lowering cholesterol levels. Now, it is true that they lower cholesterol levels. However, the polyunsaturated fatty acids have a very fragile structure, and that fragile structure is very likely to be oxidized under multiple circumstances inside the body, outside the body, in the digestive tract. And so one of the major drivers of cardiovascular disease is not necessarily just LDL by itself, LDL cholesterol. It's oxidized LDL cholesterol. And so since the polyunsaturated fatty acids are very liable or very likely to oxidize, if you incorporate a large amount of them, there's a theory out there called the omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acid oxidized cholesterol theory, or oxidized LDL theory, where essentially if you incorporate large amounts of these fats inside your LDL cholesterol, it is more likely to create oxidized LDL cholesterol, and the oxidized LDL cholesterol is what's driving the cardiovascular disease. So even though the cholesterol levels can drop with polyunsaturated fatty acids, if they are increasing oxidative stress and increasing oxidized cholesterol, then over the long term, the concern would be that they would actually worsen cardiovascular disease. And so you basically have a situation now where, number one, if the LDL cholesterol is becoming oxidized by the polyunsaturated fatty acids, is that lowering effect enough to offset the oxidative effect? And we don't actually have answers for that. And then what is the long-term effect of that? Not to mention the effects of polyunsaturated fatty acids on metabolic health, mitochondrial health, etc. So there's more to the story than just lowering or raising cholesterol overall. And this speaks to what I talked about in the beginning, is that the cholesterol is just one point or one piece of the picture. You have to have vascular dysfunction going on, endothelial dysfunction inside the arteries and the veins. And then you need to have depositing of cholesterol and oxidation of the cholesterol first before deposition, before you start to see these problems arise. So you have oxidation plus inflammation and vascular damage with cholesterol present, and oftentimes immune activation. So it's like a multi-piece picture going on inside the vasculature, not just, oh, cholesterol's there and it binds into the wall, which is the imagery that we were shown in the different saturated fat causes heart disease and cholesterol causes heart disease and statin commercials, where you see this butter and it's like, oh, the butter is just going to stick in my artery. It's like, that's a little bit more, it's a little bit more entailing than that. And there's multiple pieces going on. So when I'm thinking about cardiovascular disease with a client, what I'm thinking about is what's going on with their oxidative stress, what's going on at their at the vascular level. Do they have vascular inflammation? Do they have immune activation going on? And then what's going on with their lipid panel as well? So there's multiple factors I'm considering, and then also metabolic dysfunction. And I'm thinking about a risk profile from these different values. So I'm not just looking at a lipid panel. I'm looking at multiple different values simultaneously, engaging in each of these buckets. Like, where is the major issue going on? Is this person driving oxidative stress? Do I need to correct that? Is this person having metabolic dysfunction? Is that what needs to be corrected? Is there vascular dysfunction? Do we need to correct that? Do they already have vascular calcification? Do we need to adjust that? And trying to use multiple tools at my disposal to minimize somebody's cardiovascular risk, instead of just relying and putting all my eggs in one basket on cholesterol.
So you hear that you should be taking fish oil for cholesterol and for heart disease and lowering inflammation. Can you speak to that?
Yes, of course. So fish oil is one of the best agents right now to lower triglycerides and also to lower the lipid panel, or affect the lipid panel. It's a polyunsaturated fatty acids. It's rich in omega-3s. Now, the problem with omega-3s is that they are even more susceptible to oxidative stress than the omega-6 fatty acids are. So if you take, most chances the fish oil supplement is already peroxidized, already damaged before you take it. And then if you don't have one that's damaged, it's possible, depending on what you take it with, it'll become oxidized and damaged inside the body. And then once it gets in the body, unless it's protected to some extent, it's also possible that it will oxidize there as well. So you have this oxidation, this lipid peroxidation risk with the omega-3 fatty acids. And then the omega-3 fatty acids are lowering lipids. There's a study looking at, this is in an animal study specifically, and then there's some in vitro studies where basically when you add the omega-3 fatty acids to the liver undergoes oxidative stress, the liver cells, and then the oxidative stress damages the ability of the liver to transport cholesterol into the bloodstream. So are you lowering your cholesterol because your liver can't export it because you're creating oxidative stress? It's like, well, that's probably not the best mechanism to lower the cholesterol levels overall. You'd rather adjust it through diet, make sure metabolic health is going well so the tissues are uptaking that cholesterol. And then also, are you going to drive oxidative stress in that process? Because in these studies, they're able to minimize the oxidation of the polyunsaturated fats by either lowering iron levels or providing vitamin E. So having adequate vitamin E prevents lipid peroxidation. So the omega-3s, while they do actually lower cholesterol and they do lower triglyceride levels, the way that they're doing it is potentially problematic. They're also upregulating other signaling compounds or signaling systems in the body called the PPARs. So these are nuclear components that basically induce the storage of fats and induce the oxidation of fats. So it basically clears out the fats from the bloodstream pretty fast. So there's PPAR alpha, PPAR gamma. So the fish oil is a strong signaling molecule that activates these systems in the body to help increase the clearing of those fatty acids. Now, my hypothesis on this is that if you take a large amount of a very oxidizable fat, peroxidizable fat, the body's trying to get rid of it as fast as possible. So it signals these elements in order to try to get rid of it as fast as possible. And again, is that like an ideal way to fix underlying dysfunction? And at this point in time, I lean towards the side of no. It's probably not the ideal way, especially because I have many clients that I've worked with where I can drastically lower their lipid values and get things under control just with dietary adjustment without having to use things like that or even use statins. And it comes down relatively quickly, within a matter of a month or so or 2 months, like drastically dropping the lipid profile as long as the person is able to follow through the dietary setup that we put in place. So I would prefer to try to use dietary and lifestyle components to move the lipid profile and then correct those other areas that I mentioned, then use some of these other components that do have a verified effect of lowering lipids, but perhaps the mechanisms aren't so great.
As you're talking, it just seems like it's the big question of what came first, the chicken or the egg. There's this feedback loop of, well, is cholesterol causing the disease or is the disease causing the cholesterol irregularities? And you talk a lot about the liver. I promote my liver cleanse multiple times a year, taking liver supporting herbs and also, helping your liver with your diet. Can we dive in a little more as far as liver health? Because, what is it? Over 45% of adults have fatty liver disease, and that's growing significantly now. How that's going to affect the liver or the cholesterol profile on your blood test and triglycerides.
Yeah, so that's actually a great point because the liver is central to lipid management. The liver is producing the lipoproteins and uptaking them, putting them out into the bloodstream. It's a major site of all of this type of stuff, right? It's largely between the liver and the peripheral tissues with the bloodstream and the arteries and veins in between. So the liver is kind of like the Amazon warehouse, right? Where everything is being packaged and distributed. And so if the liver is under pressure, you have a lot of fat stored in the liver, if there's metabolic dysfunction going on at the liver, if there's insulin resistance going on at the liver, what winds up happening is the liver starts to have this overflow of fats leaving the liver. And you see this elevations with fatty NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. You're seeing the elevations of triglycerides, the elevations in the lipid profile, the LDL, the HDL, the total cholesterol. And that is driven in part by this dysfunction at the liver specifically. So making sure the liver is functioning optimally is a key part of managing the lipid profile overall, as well as making sure the peripheral tissues are functioning metabolically as well. So you need to have both things dialed in effectively. And in managing the liver, one of the major components to get under control is the gut, because one of the major stressors on the liver is basically the components coming out of the digestive tract and reaching the liver. Because when you digest food, the food all gets channeled to the liver through the portal vein. Now, fats go through a little bit of a different system, but all of the other food components move through the portal vein and go to the liver. So the liver is basically that first barrier to the rest of the body from the components coming out of the digestive tract. And so you need to make sure digestive function is going well so that you're not constantly hitting the liver, tagging the liver with toxic metabolites from the intestine every time you eat. So you want to make sure digestive health is functioning well and liver health is functioning well and in the process of managing the lipid profile. So there's multiple elements going on all together beyond just lipids, right? What I'm basically showing is there's multiple elements that are affecting the lipid profile in different ways that we need to get under control, instead of just, oh, you need to lower your cholesterol, right? So I think that's the major takeaway piece here, and especially in understanding that the cholesterol is just transport mechanisms. And then the arteries and veins are just highways, but from these different organs and tissues between each other. And so there's more affecting those things than just how much cholesterol you have floating around in the bloodstream. There's this overarching system with multiple pieces going on. And if we really want to get to the bottom of cardiovascular disease, it's going to be moving beyond just lipids. We can incorporate lipids, but we need to understand what's going on in these different systems as well. And this is also why we see people who have high risk for cardiovascular disease also have kidney disease, most times also are obese, also have diabetes, also have fatty liver, also have all of these different disease processes, autoimmune diseases, because the dysfunction in these other areas starts to tag the cardiovascular system as well through these same mechanisms. So it's not just cholesterol. There's multiple components to dial in.
So before we go, I want to make sure we talk about diet and what diet are you promoting? What foods are lowering your clients' cholesterol levels without the drugs? You mentioned carbs, no carbs earlier, and I want to make sure people understand that you're not talking about pizza and Ben and Jerry's. You're talking about whole foods and the right kind of carbs. So can you speak to diet and also lifestyle? There's exercise, sleep, and all stress. All of those things are going to make your blood panels just look wacky, not just cholesterol, but everything. But let's talk about the diet and the lifestyle.
Yes, this is a great segue into actually actionable steps for people instead of just all this theory of these different components. And so when I'm setting up diet, there's multiple steps that I'm working through with a client, and I do lay out these steps. There's a coaching program that I'm going to be launching this month, so I lay out all these steps and details on how to put everything together. But the general structure, the first thing we want to know is how much energy do you need individually on a daily basis, right? We need to know what is your energy requirement. Now, the way we gauge that is calories, so it is important to understand calories, but they just tell us about energy. They don't tell us anything else about food quality, macronutrients, micronutrients, anything like this. So we just want to use them for the tool that they're helpful for, which is understanding what your energy requirement is. The next thing after that is we want to get your macronutrients dialed in. So the first one is protein. We want to make sure you get adequate protein on a regular basis so that you can maintain the structure of your body, your muscles, your bones, your organs, your skin. And also your liver requires adequate amounts of protein, and your digestive tract requires adequate amount of protein to function on a regular basis. And that's important because those things directly are involved in managing what's going on with your lipid profile and your overall metabolic health. So protein is absolutely essential, and that's the first thing we start with. After that, we have carbs and we have fats, and these are our energy sources. So these are the two things that we're going to throttle and say, am I going to be using more carbs or am I going to be using more fats? I tend more towards carbs than towards fats. There's obviously debate in different spheres around which source you want to be using. I tend to shoot for a higher carbohydrate intake and a more moderate fat intake, about 20 to 30% of calories of fats. And then even within that, so let's talk about fats first. I'm oftentimes figuring out which fats work best for the individual. So is it going to be more monounsaturated, things like avocados, olive oil, macadamia nuts, egg yolks, maybe some beef fat, or is it going to be more saturated? Is that going to be things like dark chocolate, butter, coconut oil, and things along these lines? And people respond to these differently, and doesn't have to be one or the other. It could be a ratio or a mix. You have to figure out which ones work best for your body because it's very individual. And after that, we start to dial in carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates make up the difference after that for calories, and the calories are going to be adjusted based on your activity levels, based on your lean body mass, how lean you are, these different components. And so from there, the carbohydrates will be throttled up and down. You can adjust those based on all these different factors. And then the carb sources, again, it's quite individual. And this really comes down to, do you do better with sugars or do you do better with starches? Now, I don't mean Sour Patch. I don't mean Snickers bars or anything for sugars. I'm talking about fruits. I'm talking about 100% juices. I'm talking about smoothies, things like this. And then for the starches, you have things like tubers, that's potatoes, that's yams, that's cassava, that's taro. You also have components like oats if you do well with that, and then possibly rice. So you're really, those are your starchy carb sources. So you're kind of figuring out what fuel source is going to work best for you. Do you need a higher octane fuel? Do you need a more slower burning fuel? And that's going to change based on your digestive capabilities and based on your metabolic function and a variety of different components. So there's a lot of different elements to dial in, but we want to know what's your total energy intake. If you're having metabolic dysfunction, we don't want to have your energy super high so that you're plowing fuel into the furnace and the furnace isn't working and now you're creating all this smoke. So we need to get that dialed in effectively. Then we want to get your protein under control to make sure you have all of the necessary components that you need for your gut, your liver, your organs to function. And then we figure out your energy sources. Now, there's more to the story for the carbs and fats than just energy. They have other effects. I don't want to go into all of that right now because it's quite a long conversation. But I want to jump into the next piece that's important, and that's going to be your micronutrients. So you want to make sure you have adequate vitamins and minerals coming in a diet on a regular basis so that you can actually use these different macronutrients, the protein, carbs, and fats appropriately. So you need to make sure that all of your vitamins and minerals are dialed in effectively. That's between diet and supplements. And if you have metabolic dysfunction, if you have atherogenic dyslipidemia, if you have gut issues, you may have a higher requirement for certain nutrients at certain periods of time. So that's the next step with the diet, is getting those components under control. There's also fiber as well. And then once we have these components dialed in, then it's how are you arranging your meals across the day? How many meals are you having? What are the components in your meals? How are you managing your blood sugar? And then the piece after that is how are you making sure that you can run your diet on a consistent basis and implement it into your lifestyle. And that's something that's often forgot inside these different dietary spheres. Like, I'm going to have my tomahawk steak for breakfast, and I'm going to have my fresh pressed pineapple juice. It's like, for me, I worked in the ICU while I was doing all this dietary stuff. I was like, there's zero chance that I'm making a tomahawk steak for breakfast. It's just not happening. I need something quick and easy. And then I also, with my clients, like, I have to get my 3 kids to school. So I'm not here trying to grill this tomahawk steak in my whatever the special grill is or things like this, or have this like super intricate breakfast set up with eggs and all these different components. Like, I need something quick and easy. So it's also about how do you implement in your life. And I think that's extremely important. So for when I'm working with somebody, and even the course that I set up is running through and setting up all these pieces and figuring out how to make this work for you, because the nutrition piece is extremely personalized, extremely individual, and you have to dial those elements in. And there's not going to be this one size fits all approach for everybody. There's principles, but they need to be applied to the individual. And that takes a little bit of tweaking and finagling over time.
Well, I love that you said about consistency and emphasizing that point, because it's all great talking about what you want to do, but unless you implement it, and as a mom of 3, I'm super busy. I need to make sure dinner is I can prepare it within 20 minutes, right? And I need to make sure all 3 of my kids have their food. And my one daughter is an athlete in college. She's like, Mom, I don't have time to make myself this or that. And so we have to get creative. It doesn't have to be gourmet, guys. It will still be tasty. And that is something that I have dialed in. I mean, I just had a bison fillet for lunch, and it was 8 minutes in the air fryer on broil, and it was fantastic. So there's a way to do it. And but you do want to adhere to the program. Mike, I could talk to you for hours, but before we go, where can people find you?
Yes, thank you. They can find me at my YouTube channel, Mike Fave YouTube, and then they can also find me on my website, mikefave.com.
Awesome. I love your emails, and your YouTube channel is fantastic, because you've got 2, one for the layman and one for the really geeky, sciencey people. So make sure you check those out, everybody. He is one of my favorites to listen to on a weekly basis. So thanks again. And thanks everybody else. Our discussion does not have to stop here. Did we just twirl your mind around as far as your cholesterol numbers? I'm here to help. We can continue the conversation on my group coaching on Telegram. I can answer your questions. And also, if you're feeling lost with the supplement world, Mike mentioned the need for micronutrients. You know, I'm a huge proponent of the Acceleradine iodine. We are all deficient in iodine, and it is super important for a lot of the things we're talking about, and others as well. So make sure you join the free group coaching. You can contact me through the website, sarabantahealth.com, to get your free supplement protocol just for you. Follow me on social media at Accelerated Health Products. You can listen to this podcast and all the podcasts on Spotify, Apple, iHeart, and over 100 platforms. And you can also get 10% off your first order of the cutting edge supplements at acceleratedhealthproducts.com using coupon WELCOME10. I'm live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, so join me next time for more ways to unlock your health potential. Thanks for joining us, and have a great week.